Hi, everyone. We're back. Welcome to the Space Policy Show by the Aerospace Corporation. I'm Colleen Stover. So remember, you can get notified of new shows as they're released by subscribing to our YouTube channel or on your preferred podcast platform. And there we have 3 years of shows that are all there, arranged by multiple playlists, focused on the areas of policy and strategy in the space sector. So we're kicking off this season with a discussion on how the United States Space Force is working to increase the launch throughput in order to assure access to space. Also about building up space mobility, things like launch vehicle interfaces with satellites or cargo as a service, and the importance of automation, artificial intelligence, the sheer innovation that's going on right now with Space Force. So we're pleased to host Major General Stephen Purdy. He's quad-hatted, but I'll describe him here as the director of the Eastern Range at Florida's Patrick Space Force Base. So he'll be talking to Aerospace's Vice President of Launch and Architecture Operations, Randy Kendall. Let's get started.
Thanks for that introduction, Colleen, and a big thank you to General Purdy for sitting down with me today to talk about your vision for the future of assured access to space. Now, from your bio, it's pretty apparent that you got 4 different jobs, right? And so we're going to talk about all that, but I know you're a pretty busy guy. What I think most people really want to know is, what do you do with your free time? I have it on good authority. You're an avid gamer. So what are you playing these days?
I am a gamer. I don't get to play as many games as I used to because of the 4 jobs, but I play a mix of games right now. I'm playing Skyrim and Skyrim modded. I like to mod Skyrim to see if I can bring the computer down to its knees with the graphics. I just downloaded and we started playing Hogwarts Legacy. That's a new one that's been out recently. I've been playing Cyberpunk. Sometimes I play a little GTA 4. Mostly open world explorations are kind of what I like to enjoy. I like to go around the mountains and pick flowers. So it's pretty fun.
Nice. Sounds good. Well, thanks for playing along with us today. And seriously, you have an amazing scope of responsibilities in your current role, as you know, and that affords you a tremendous opportunity, I think, to fundamentally reshape the way the Space Force approaches what we've traditionally thought of as just launch, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your vision for assured access to space?
Absolutely. So it's a pretty expansive vision, and there's a lot of stages to it. In the past, we were just seen as a launch organization, but we're really so much more. In order to do launch successfully, national security launch, you have to have a lot of steps in the progress. And one of the main pieces I've always had were the ranges, of course. But there's a lot of steps in between. There is the transport of the vehicles and the satellites. There is payload processing at the spaceport locations. There are multiple different spaceports. Some are not owned by the federal government that we'd like to start exploring that hasn't been normally in our domain. And then there are brand new areas. There are concepts now where we talk about on-orbit maneuver and logistics, servicing, fueling. There are concepts that AFRL is working, rocket cargo, for example. And so when you start to put it all together, you start to realize that there really is a complete end-to-end mission set here. And we really kind of view ourselves at a macro perspective like an air mobility command for space. With some AFMC acquisitions thrown in, so Air Force Material Command. So we view ourselves as a space material command, kind of a major command, to use Air Force terms, or a field command in Space Force terms. And so kind of the end-to-end maneuver, end-to-end movement of payloads, be it satellites, people, or military equipment, from a origin destination to a spaceport, managing that integration, launching it, be it point to point around the Earth, or moving it into orbit, then around orbit, and then a debris cleanup, frankly, on the way back. So kind of a combat support function that does acquisitions and operations. And that's kind of the last final piece of the vision. Is we are somewhat unique in the Space Force in that we're vertically organized. So we have our own requirement set, our own acquisitions, our own operations, and our own sustainment. And that kind of plays into the vision as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's a super exciting vision. So let's tease apart some of those pieces maybe and talk about. There's been a dramatic increase in the pace of launch at both ranges, but especially at the eastern range. So first, what do you see going forward? Where is there an end in sight, or is it just going to keep going? And what are some of the innovations maybe that have allowed the Space Force to support that increased pace?
Yeah, that is the question. Where's the end in sight? So just a few years ago, it wasn't unheard of in the Western Range to just have a couple of launches a year. And a few years ago, they had 10. Last year, they had 19. And this coming year, they're planning for 42. A huge jump. And then typically on the Eastern Range, it wasn't unusual to have about 10 launches a year, give or take a few. 2 years ago, we had, oh my, I'm blanking out, 31. Last year, something like 56. And this year, we're planning for something like 90-ish, give or take. And so that's like 130, 150 launches, depending on your public math skills, for the two ranges, just the two ranges. That's phenomenal. And yet, we think there's a doubling and perhaps even a tripling of that. So on the Eastern Range, we talk about numbers of, hey, 2 years ago, we were talking about, hey, we think we're going to get into 2 to 3 to 400 launches a year. Well, we're hitting that 100 mark here pretty soon, and we think within a few years we'll be to potentially 2, 3, 400 just on the Eastern Range alone. And the reason is for a couple fold. There's a massive increase in commercial launch itself. Most of the launches we do, 90% perhaps, 80 to 90% are commercial launches. And the fascinating part, particularly on the Eastern Range, is most of that is just from two launch vehicles, or two launch companies, SpaceX and United Launch Alliance. We're now adding several other companies. We're on the cusp of adding several others, and that's going to dramatically increase the rates. And then when you look toward projections, both on the satellite side, the commercial side, proliferated LEO constellations, for example, are projecting many more thousands of satellites, which require hundreds of launches. And then you look toward the launch vehicle projections, people like SpaceX and Starship saying that they're going to go launch a couple 200 to 300 times a year just in themselves alone. You put all that together and it looks like a pretty vibrant future for the ranges, and one that guides us and serves as a guidepost, frankly, for us as we move forward to sort of figure out, hey, what are all the limb facts in place to allow us to get after and support that?
Yeah, that's an amazing amount of launches. Something I couldn't have envisioned at the beginning of my career, and I'm sure you feel the same. So, that's from the launch vehicle launch demand perspective. As a provider of services and infrastructure, how do you keep up from infrastructure and processing facilities? And can you talk a little bit about, I know a big area of emphasis has been spaceports of the future. So can you describe what that is?
Yeah, from a spaceport of the future, we used to call it range of the future back in the day. We're moving to a spaceport concept. That's really a key enabler, and there's multiple pieces underneath that, and that's what allows us to continue to provide the services. So if you roll back and step back, we view our two spaceports, Vandenberg and Cape Canaveral, as spaceports. It really helps to think of them in terms of airports. An airport has sort of an airport authority who kind of runs that airport, and they charge fees and provide services. An airport is all about providing services to the airlines that then take people and cargo wherever they want. In many ways, the spaceports are the same way. So we're breaking apart the problem. And so there is an architectural piece of how we lay out some of the architectural range components. So think of things like weather radars and telemetry and those kinds of things. There are policy pieces that we've broken out. We are allowed to, for example, charge direct costs, the electrical usage, for example, but we can't charge indirect costs and overhead costs. And so we really can't get after solving infrastructure and manpower problems. And so changing some policy will help along those lines. I can't, for example, accept any money from SpaceX or Blue Origin or United Launch Alliance if they wanted to give me money to go fix an infrastructure item, for example. There's a manpower people component. There's a technology component to provide all this data flowing around. So there's a huge technology piece as well. So all of these pieces brought together come together to sort of form that spaceport of the future. and you can tackle it from each one of these aspects, and as they all come together, that's when you're able to really achieve goodness from these services. And and I'll point out, there are some pieces that are really critical. So like automated flight termination systems. So automating that whole process allows us a huge step function up, right? So we're able to move a large amount of people and hardware and take them out of the equation. But then there are other pieces where we have worked hard with the FAA and Navy to really reduce a lot of just plain phone call time, phone tag, where we're back and forth trying to work scheduling. That's just a people process thing, but that enabled us to save thousands of hours for both the Space Force and the Navy. So good stuff. So really sort of teasing apart each one of these little areas and tackling each one.
How about satellite processing? I know that's a big bottleneck, right? Where are all these satellites going to go to get prepped for the launch campaign?
Yeah, so the satellite processing has been a particularly hot topic over many years on both ranges. There's a solution in place now that works from a government perspective and the current government's satellite perspective. Commercial industry has been adding to that. So, for example, SpaceX, to handle their massive amounts of Starlinks, they built their own processing capability so that they can sort of control their own destiny. As we are moving in the Department of Defense to a more distributed architecture, more and more satellites will be pushed up that are government. We start to run into a severe limitation on the payload processing side. So on the Eastern Range, we were able to demonstrate mathematically the issue of, hey, we don't have enough processing. And we were able to incorporate, as part of our architecture and land swap and environmental under our Spaceport of the Future concept, some spaces where we can dedicate some potential future payload processing on the Cape itself. So we put out our request for information to industry. A couple of industry players responded, and we're working through that process. And hopefully we're going to have in a few years some nice payload processing on the Cape. On the Western Range, and by the way, commercial industry is driving a huge part of that. So commercial industry will be one of the main bill payers for that in terms of they'll use that and it'll be right there on the Cape, and then the government gets an advantage out of that. On the Western Range, a little different. There's not as much of a commercial driver. And so we're still working. We have a couple of commercial folks that are interested. They're not yet to commit. And so we're working with them to sort of help them figure out business cases. And the hope is that we can land one of these, allocate room, just like we did on the Eastern Range, and have another payload processor on the Western Range, which will then meet government demands.
Very cool. Yeah, that partnership with commercial is just increasingly important across the entire space enterprise. So very cool. Let's talk about innovation a little bit. I know you're a huge proponent of innovation in all aspects of things, and you've done some really interesting things down at Patrick. I've heard stories about robot dogs. Tell me about that.
That's right. So we've done a lot of really interesting work here. I'm really excited about it for a couple of different reasons. One, we built it really quickly. And so there's a neat object lesson here that shows a little bit of leadership. You put some people in charge, you allocate just a little bit of money, and you let them run. And so in a year and a half, we built a spark cell from scratch at Patrick Space Force Base, the only spark cell in the Space Force. Spark cells are fairly common on the Air Force bases, but not common on the Space Force base. It probably makes sense because they tend to be much more tactical in nature and hands-on to fix little widgets, say on a flight range or whatnot. And we do have those elements so that mostly supports the air side of the base here at Patrick. But we've been able to then expand on from there once we got practiced. And so we've pulled within the last year $10 million of small business innovative research funds. That's pretty huge. From scratch to $10 million is that, and also Spark Cell just funded now competitions within the broader Air Force. That has enabled us to go buy things like robot dogs, some robot UAVs. We're on the cusp of getting some robot boats, we think. Some technology to go look at sensors. And so why is that important? Because now you start actually getting into the space mission and the spaceport mission itself. those tools allow us to explore, hey, how good are those at helping us in automation? We don't have enough manpower and people. And so you can use technology and sensor nets in some of these robot activities to go push out up onto the Cape. And from a robot boat perspective, automated boats, you can push that out into the range area on the water and start doing automated patrol routines, for example, for a launch. Our launch rates that we mentioned earlier are so high that the Coast Guard is just not able to keep up with all of that activity. They have a mainline job. And so we think we can use automation and technology to go help with all that. And then part two of the innovation discussion is really fascinating. At the range itself, as part of the range upgrade, we had built a shadow center, a technology upgrade area. So think of a shadow ops is one way to think of it, where we put technology and tech stacks together, and then we were able to work some software and technology pieces with the users. So some notable ones with the range, but also with the weather squadron. Those improvements are huge because we were able to beat our own acquisitions internally and pump those out in different revs onto the floor. Because we had that environment, we worked with the Department of Air Force, ACC, Air Combat Command, A6, and there's only 3 zero trust activities going on in the Department of Air Force. And that we're doing the one that's operational. And so we have that active where we have all sorts of tech and screens, our counter UAS systems, our robot sensors, all pouring in to screens using zero trust. And we can do it from an off-site location. Not final yet, but really close. And all of that kind of shows the advantages of getting after innovation at a base level, at a squadron level, at a work center and functional level, but then also getting into our range and our mission levels.
Fantastic. That sounds really cool. Hey, let's talk about getting into orbit. So space mobility. I know there's a big space mobility conference coming up. Tell me about how AATS is leading in that area.
Absolutely. We're hosting a space mobility conference, of kind of a first of its kind conference. We got our feet wet last fall in Los Angeles by having a reverse industry day, space mobility and logistics reverse industry day. That was really a first ever. Back there in the fall. We got a lot of attention on that one. There are a lot of companies that are doing a lot of great work in this on-orbit maneuver, servicing, logistics, fuel areas. A lot more than we thought. And so that was great. And so we realized that, okay, we need to really bring this whole story together. So we are hosting the Space Mobility Conference in Orlando. That is the first of, and we think this will be a first of a series of conferences. This conference will sort of cover the whole gamut. Spaceports, launch vehicle interfaces with satellites, but then really hitting hard rocket cargo and space mobility and logistics. That on-orbit piece, there's a lot of stuff going on there. And so that's a new area that we're just exploring. We've got some requirements set. We know that we want to get after it. We know that the operational warfighter, U.S. Spacecom, is interested in that activity. And here's kind of the colloquial variant of it. So in no other military domain would you take a tank or an aircraft or a Jeep or a ship and gas it up. And then you'd say, okay, we want you to think about your fuel usage for the entire lifetime of service of your vehicle, and you will never refuel it again, and you don't ever get to upgrade it again or anything. Go off. And so that makes it very difficult to use satellites in a warfighting construct. If you want to expend a little bit of fuel, you're having to play calculations about, hey, do I need to use this fuel 10 years from now? Is this thing that I'm going to go look at the most important thing I need in the lifetime of the vehicle? And so U.S. Space Command and the warfighter side want to get out of that. So they want to be able to just do what they need to do and be supported by maneuver, i.e., say a C-17 or a tanker in the air domain. And that makes sense. In the other domains, you get refueled and supplied and repaired as needed. There are depots. And so using the other domains helps a lot to think about what's coming up in space. Sort of a final one on the debris side. When I say remove debris, people don't necessarily know what that means, particularly in the space domain. But when I say that we need a mine clearing capability and a mine detection and a mine clearing capability. People understand what that means in the Navy domain. And that's kind of what it is, what space debris is. I need to be able to detect that debris and remove that debris so that I can maintain freedom of motion in the space environment.
Yeah, lots of great stuff going on in mobility and logistics. Sounds really exciting. And I know, actually, now that I think about it, that mobility conference is on the 21st. So people are probably watching it maybe at the conference or at the SpaceCom event immediately following. So really excited to participate in that. Yeah, so you mentioned also rocket cargo. Tell me a little bit about where Space Force is going with rocket cargo. I know you're partnered with AFRL on that.
Yeah, with rocket cargo, that's really interesting. So AFRL owns that one right now as a Vanguard program. And so they've transitioned several of their other Vanguards over into operations, and this one is still one that they are looking at. When it's an Air Force Research Lab Vanguard program, it means it's all hands on deck, and so they have all their elements in working on it. At the same time, companies like SpaceX, notably, who started this activity through a creator with US Transcom, US Transportation Command, is working the actual technology side and the build out side. So, namely through their Starship. And so we're kind of in a wait and see operational mode. We, as the acquisition side and the warfighter side, are taking the work done by the laboratory and sort of attempting to operationalize it, asking what if questions. So we're working with US Transcom, working with the combatant commands, working with Indo-PACOM, for example, to figure out, hey, what kinds of equipment would you want to be using this for? And what kind of timelines? And so working through, hey, what would the requirement set be? And how would we buy this activity as a service? Which is right now we buy launch as a service. So we would like to buy a rocket cargo concept as a service. So SpaceX is sort of on the lead on this one, and there are other ones that are nibbling around in terms of the rocket side as well. And then, like I said, working with the AFRL side on the technology piece. And so we're kind of in the center trying to marry all this up. If there's a lot of ifs, there's several ifs that all have to work really well. But it's a pretty fascinating concept, and it actually allows launch for the first time to directly provide capability to warfighters and combatant commands in theaters by launching and then landing or dropping things off in an airdrop on the way into that theater. So we're really eager for this one. There's several pieces of tech that still have to be developed, but we're kind of depending on that tech being developed to make sure that we're postured as quickly as possible in case it does come to fruition.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, you mentioned new tech. What do you see coming down the line? What do you think is going to be the next big breakthrough that's going to, change or enable what the Space Force is able to do?
So, do you mean from just in general or a launch
just in general? What does your crystal ball say out there?
So I like. There's a couple pieces. I'm going to actually argue data, right? So data is not really new tech, but learning from the data, collecting the data, researching the data, operationalizing the data is all important. We're kind of weak on that side, so we're still in the process right now of collecting a lot of this data together. You see programs like that. Various named programs in the Air Force and in the DoD side to do that. On the launch side, I think we're working that same effort and working to do that on the Spaceport side. So we're fully aware and operational on the Spaceport side and sort of warfighting the Spaceport side piece. But from an Air Force and a DoD perspective, I really think that data is it. We hosted a data hackathon here. It was called Bravo Hackathon at Patrick. It was also hosted at 2 other locations. Ours was unclassified, and so we had about 140 personnel show up from our unit and from many others. We provided data and data streams, and then there were a couple other data streams that were provided. It was fascinating when I went over there and watched them in small groups, essentially hacking the data, analyzing the data, looking for patterns, looking for clues, trying to find the what if question that we had given them, and they found several other interesting things to ask and to use the data for. That gave me the clue that, hey, maybe we need these operational data activities. Maybe there needs to be squadrons in the future that are looking at data itself. There are other people already worried about collecting the data. And we have other people doing cyber defense and offense kind of activity, but we don't necessarily have people dedicated toward analyzing the data itself. And we always use the term AI and ML, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and you kind of just roll your hands along with that. But taking that stuff, chat GPT and all those kinds of things, and using those with the data that we have and continually adding more and more data, I think is a great unknown. And I really think that's a major area that we can get after now. That's actually pretty inexpensive. There's a lot of tools that are available, and we have a lot of data just left on the floor right now.
Yeah, I know that's a huge emphasis for the Space Force in general, is digital engineering, a digital force, and we're doing a lot of things with artificial intelligence, even in the launch mission assurance realm. Can you talk about the role of AI in making sure that we're assuring our launch capability?
Yeah, so with so many launches and increased government launches, it requires, in theory, a classic increase of the amount of manpower and time it takes to do our classic mission assurance. Mission assurance is our version in the DoD, in the Department of Defense, of insurance. Commercial industry can go buy insurance and launch a rocket and satellite. And if something happens, they can go to the insurance company and get their money back and go build a new satellite. They've lost time, but they have money back. We in the DoD don't do that, actually. So we insure ourselves. And so if we have a really expensive satellite, we tend to do what's called mission assurance, which means studying the rocket, studying the satellite to a large degree at costs less than insurance for a commercial variant. But what's the payoff? We can prove that over time, we're actually able to save more missions than if we had just gone normal commercial routes. But with increased launch, we can't continue to buy those people in that time. And so automated tools are huge here. So we've already started to use some good, strong automated intelligence. It's focused. AI seems to work really well when it's focused on a problem set. And we've been using AI on our launch mission assurance activities to focus in these areas to help clue us in on the areas that we need to actually look at. So we can use a lot of tools to go look at mass amounts of data and verify that everything is as it should be. And then we could allocate humans toward the more precious or more specific areas. We've had good success with that. We've avoided some launch delays in the recent past by using some of these tools, and we look toward continuing to use those even more and more.
Yeah, I know we're excited about that at Aerospace for sure. So I think we're nearing the end of our time here. Any last words or thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
I'm going to go with a culture angle. So Space Force was built, to be basically a digital and a data service and a different kind of a service from the beginning. General Raymond, our first chief of space operations, was fond of saying, "Hey, this is going to be the first digital service, essentially." And so the question is how do we continue down that line? Here at Patrick Space Force Base, we set up a gaming lounge. And we did that from a culture perspective. There's a good reason you'd want to do that from a people perspective. It's walking distance to our dorms, and a lot of our younger set play games. But the act of game playing, and not only is it just a personal habit of mine, but that kind of critical thinking and analysis and coding and digital engineering and artificial intelligence and data analysis is all in an area that's really rich for the Space Force. In many ways, the Space Force is a gigantic digital data manipulation service. We have a bunch of satellites in orbit, and they're pushing around data. And the ability to manage that data, see the data, view it as data, look for trends, look for analysis is all critical. And so I encourage everyone to continue drawing down that line, asking the questions, trying to eliminate the chaff and the things that don't need to be done, and get after the heart of it. Get after those data pieces, get after the culture pieces, and keep driving, asking the why, eliminating the time wasters, and going after those pieces. That helps in any walk of life, but particularly in the Space Force when we're so young and in a smaller number service. So we've seen huge success with that here at Patrick and Cape. In other areas at Space Systems Command and Aerospace has seen that, and so I would encourage everyone to continue down those lines.
Well, that's really exciting. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. I really appreciate it. And back over to you, Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you to viewers and listeners for joining us today. The spaceports of the future has a nice ring to it, if you ask me. So don't forget, you can find out more from Aerospace's Center for Space Policy and Strategy at csps.aerospace.org. Thank you to James Liggins, our technical director, and we'll see you next time.